Welcome back, everyone, to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by Support Now. I'm super excited about our guest today, who happens to be from Atlanta, which I learned on our pre-call discussion. But you guys are in for a treat. I have the pleasure today of having Mary Catherine Starr, who is an illustrator, a graphic designer, yoga teacher, an author, a mother of two, and an incredible creator. Her handle is momlife_comics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But she is just terrific. And this conversation, I'm hoping to be, real life conversations about motherhood, the mental load, kind of how we manage the relationships with our significant others and all the challenges that come with that. But Mary Catherine has just done such a beautiful job on Instagram, really illustrating kind of what that modern motherhood really looks like. So Mary Catherine, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah. So again, we have some things in common. Of course, the mom thing, the Atlanta thing. I always find it very interesting to learn a little bit more about how people kind of transitioned into motherhood. I think for some, it comes super simply, very easy, love at first sight, no issues for mama, no issues for child. I know for me personally, while my kids are healthy, it took me a while to really connect with my kids. And I think that's really important to normalize. But I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your entryway into motherhood and what really kickstarted this entire perspective on motherhood for you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's what you said about normalizing like all the kind of challenges at the beginning of motherhood is really important. And that's been something that my kids are now 9 and 6, almost 10 and 7. And I think I'm still recovering from the first year or two of being a parent, and it's like the more distance I get from the early years, the more I realize like that was so intense. That was so hard. It was so traumatic for me. And I think also my relationship is still recovering from those first 2 years, which I'm sure we'll talk about more. But basically my daughter's my first child. And she, I had a very traumatic birth. We were both healthy, but it was very different than what I expected. I was really hoping for a birth with no interventions, and I felt really prepared for that. And I'd, done all my homework, and I'm a very type A kind of perfectionistic person. I'm the eldest daughter, and I went into birth just kind of like knowing, intellectually I knew anything could happen. I'm not in control, but I still feel like I very much expected that my body can do this. I've been told my body can, and I'm going to. And as we all know, you can't control anything in birth. And it was really scary and horrible. And I felt like I'd failed, by the end. It was a 36-hour labor. And the last few hours of it were pretty scary. And I came out of it just thinking, I'll never, ever be able to have another child because that was too scary. And also I came out of it feeling like I had failed at the very first test of motherhood, giving birth the way that I had thought at the time, would be best for my child. And so that was like my very first experience was like, well, I failed at that. And then my daughter, we actually, the first few weeks were better than the rest of that first year. But once she got out of the newborn kind of sleep phase, she basically didn't sleep again until she was like 14 months. I mean, it was just brutal on the sleep front. Other things were okay, but the sleeping, she didn't sleep and I didn't sleep. And I have anxiety and it went out of control, and it got to the point, where I was, I think, looking back, just so sleep deprived that I was in a very deep kind of postpartum anxiety cycle that I couldn't get out of.
And could you label it at the time? Like, could you label it as postpartum? Because I think that's also part of the challenge for first-time parents. And I think that Instagram and social media, this is like a positive of social media. I think that there's so much content now. There's so many creators talking about their experience post-birth that now maybe people can connect with that, and being able to label something makes it easier to process and then therefore get treatment or help or medication, therapy, whatever that looks like. But when you can't label it, you truly feel like you're going crazy.
Yeah. And I thought, well, it's just the sleep deprivation. If I could just get sleep, I'd be fine, which who knows, maybe it would have been a lot better. But, yes, I was so on the lookout for postpartum depression. I knew about that. And I knew, I heard the term postpartum anxiety floating around, but I just felt like, well, if I can just get my baby to sleep, everything will be fine, and then all of my focus and attention went into that. And I became just totally obsessed. And, again, it was a place I felt like I was failing. I could not get my child to sleep, and therefore I was a bad mom, and that kind of cycled into what happened with my husband and I, which is a very important part of this conversation. So I'll explain it a little bit now. Which is that we started dating when I was 18. I'm 41 now. So we've been together, I've been with him longer than I've been not with him. And we had by the time we had kids, we had a pretty clear cut division of labor in our house. We were really equal. I felt like we were in a very egalitarian, modern, feminist relationship where, there was no like, oh, I cook and he works. It wasn't like that. We did our dishes side by side every night, like chatting. We grocery shopped together. We each did our own laundry side by side. We were very much just like this little team that operated with an equal division of labor. And in that first year, because I work for myself and I have a more flexible schedule, and my husband had a really pretty strict schedule at the time, we kind of just fell into a lot of those kind of more traditional gender roles, despite trying not to. And I think what goes into this the most is that because my daughter wasn't sleeping, I should also say she never took a bottle. She would not take one.
Really?
So I also,
that pressure was on him.
He couldn't wake up with her. I mean, he could, but he would have just had to bring her to me. And so it felt like I just had to be the one to do all the nighttime parenting. And so, we started all these really bad habits where he didn't know how to console her at night because he couldn't give her a bottle. Oh, she also didn't take a binky. So there was literally nothing he could do. So I started becoming the nighttime parent. And then, she became way more attached to me and I became the preferred parent for everything because I was her food source. I was her only nurturing source. You
were her comfort. You were everything.
I was everything.
Yeah.
Yes, I was everything. And so and then because I was, home with her more and had, set up a more flexible schedule where I was, I had her in daycare, but it was very part-time because again, I thought I can do it all. Everyone says you can. I was running my own business, but I'll just do it while she naps. Well, if your child doesn't nap, you can't really run your business. So it was just a cluster that first year. And we came out of it with, me really resenting my husband, feeling very alone in parenting, despite him trying everything he could, but him feeling really useless. And feeling really frustrated too, because I was always mad at him, but there was nothing he could do because our child rejected him because he didn't have any way to soothe her. It was just a really, really hard year. And it wasn't until, she was probably like 16, 17 months old where I started to kind of come out of it. And I think, it's again, like it still lingers. It still lingers. And we've been basically working on kind of clawing our way back to equal parenthood, a place where he's as involved in the raising of our kids as I am. Because what happened then, of course, was, even when she starts to sleep, she's still, I'm totally her preferred parent. Right. And then we had a second and, now I'm his preferred parent too, because he's following what his sister does and she's showing him that I'm the parent you want to be with. And, so much of that, even as I became aware of what had happened and my husband kind of started to get on board with like, we need to fix this with me. It's really hard to fix these ingrained patterns in a family once you've established them. And also when everything in the culture is trying to push you both into these boxes, which is, a much bigger conversation. But
I'm curious though, what were some of the techniques? What were some of the things that you and your husband tried to do to level set or to kind of get back on not necessarily equal footing, but just in a place where there wasn't any resentment or any sort of like kind of negative disdain for one another? Because to your point, like when you have postpartum, whether it's depression, anxiety, or just postpartum in general, and you're kind of not feeling right with your significant other, that makes the parenting baby years significantly harder.
Yeah.
What did you try? And like looking back, was there anything that you kind of wish you would have done differently or that you did differently with your second versus your first?
Yeah. Well, I will say I wrote a whole book about this basically because I we'll talk about my book later, but I wrote my book, which is a comic memoir, kind of trying to figure that out. Like it was like this exploration, this like, here's what our relationship looked like before kids. Here's what happened when we had kids, and here's what we've been doing ever since to kind of figure it out. So that really is kind of the journey I tried to capture in my book in the hopes that people can learn from our mistakes. And also, it was a way for me to kind of therapeutically look back at it and kind of peel back the layers and say, what did happen? And how did we get there? How do we get out? And, I would say we're still not out of it completely, but we have made a ton of changes. We did start going to couples therapy during the pandemic when we kind of, everyone culturally hit that breaking point.
Yeah.
Totally. And of course we did in our house very much so.
Say less about the COVID. We get it. Yeah.
But yeah, so, we did start going to couples therapy, which I think has been one of the biggest things. But I also, I got on medication for my anxiety, which has been a huge help for both of us. We've had way too many conversations about the mental load, but it's very much a part of our household lingo now is like, who owns the mental load of this task? Are you taking that on? There's just a lot of conversation around that kind of stuff, which there wasn't before. It was just a lot of resentment and small fights. And now there's a lot more.
You found a way to like openly talk about, hey, like this is one of these things where like you don't feel it, but I feel it. And even though it's not technically on anyone's to-do list, I feel a responsibility to like step into this particular task or role, et cetera.
Yeah. And I think also, because again, I can only speak for myself, but I've had to do a lot of work to see where I was kind of buying into the messaging I've received, where it's like, this is my job, because I'm the mom, I have to own this, even if I don't want to. And I think I was doing some, and I'm not blaming myself, but I do think what was modeled to me by my own mom, who was a stay-at-home mom, and what I feel like I've heard from all of the cultural and societal messaging I've gotten my whole life is, that everything kid-related is mom's job. And I think the perfectionist kind of do-gooder person inside of me who wants to do it all, who thinks I should be able to, had a hard time giving up stuff, too, to my husband, or letting things go, or saying, I'm going to let him own that in his way, even if it's not the way I would do it. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that I've also had to look at.
And how do you feel like this kind of shapes your own kids and how you model in front of them and what you want them to take from this?
Well, there's a lot of conversation with them about like, well, boys can do this too, or dads can do this too. This is just as, moms aren't the only one who can do this. There's a lot of conversation like that. And there's a lot of talking about kind of double standards. Well, people expect moms to do this way, and they don't expect the same thing of dads. But we know in our family that dads and moms can both do this well. And those kind of conversations.
Yeah.
It's really hard, though, because I just feel like the messaging that we all receive about men versus women, boys versus girls, dad versus mom, it's really strong. And it's hard no matter what you do at home. People are getting that messaging in the marketing and in the shows that they watch and in the commercials, everything. And then at school and what they see in other families. And so I think it's really intense. It's hard to change these patterns.
Sure. So talk to me a little bit more about your creative outlet to make sense of this. What came first, the book, the comic? Share more about your illustration background, because what you've done has really made it quite relatable for other mothers to kind of put their everyday frustrations into a very simple visual format. But I'm curious, what was that creative journey like for you?
Yeah. Well, all this background is really what led me to making these comics. That I was in this place where I felt really frustrated. I felt really alone, which I feel like everyone now is saying that as a mom, which is so great that we can now go to the internet to talk about this stuff. But I started making the comics in 2020, and actually right before the pandemic. It was January 2020. I started making these comics, and I didn't call them comics at the time. I really was looking for just a way. Actually, I should back up. I had a blog, like a long time blog from, I started it back in 2009. And I've been blogging for many years. I had a very small little kind of blog community. But I was talking about motherhood a lot on my blog. And I was talking about the hard parts. And I was trying to figure out, what images do I share? I was really not into like stock photos. I always used my own photos. And I didn't really want to put up these like shiny, happy pictures of me and my kids when I was talking about how hard it was. And I also didn't want to put up like depressing pictures either. I was like, what imagery do I put up with this conversation I want to have? And so I was like, I started kind of playing around with drawing for it. And I should say, I was an art major. I'm an artist. Like I was doing graphic design.
You pick up a marker.
I was like, let me try.
You discovered this like a hidden talent. It's something you had been cultivating for a while. Okay,
I've been expressing myself creatively
better
my whole life. And really what happened was, I was a painter and stuff at that time, but I had just gotten actually it's right here, drawing tablet, a little graphic drawing tablet. I'd never used one before. And so right around that time that I got that, I thought maybe I'll try drawing with this little tablet and see if I can draw some little kind of quick and easy pictures that I can share with these blog posts about motherhood. And so that's kind of what started these illustrations. And the first few I drew were just, kind of like a picture of me as a hot mess, making some little quip about how hard motherhood was. And, I did some about like moms, kind of every mom looking back and thinking it was easier before her. I just did some kind of really simple little drawings. And I noticed as I shared them on my personal Instagram, that they were really getting shared a lot. And people started commenting, it was just like way more conversation than I usually had on my Instagram posts. And a lot of the people who I was connected with that time were moms of the same age with young kids. So it was like very much speaking to kind of my community just from my little blog. And they kept growing. I kept doing them. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And so then they became this very important therapeutic outlet. It was like I would lock myself in my office and I would like do one of these drawings and share it with some sort of, caption about how hard things were for moms at the time. And it really did just become this kind of way that I was expressing my frustrations visually on the internet so I could kind of connect with other people who felt the same way. I mean, that's really what it was. And I did that on my personal for over a year before I started to realize like, this is maybe needs its own little home on the internet. I should create a whole separate account for these comics and kind of give them their own world. And that's, kind of where things took off after that.
Wow.
That was July 2021. So, many years ago now.
Yeah. But like, I guess it would be considered a third COVID child, right?
Yes.
This like budding business, because that's effectively what it became, right? It became not just a creative outlet, but it became, I would imagine, a revenue channel for you and a pretty incredible and exemplary way to connect with others in a way that was very authentic to your talents and your perspective.
Yeah. And it's also been really healing. I think kind of this whole journey of making these comics about what I'm going through, what I'm feeling. And, as it grew and expanded, people also submit their stories to me and I draw other people's experiences. But the great thing about comics is I can kind of hide behind them. It doesn't have to be my face. I can really be honest and vulnerable in a way that I probably wouldn't if it was like me. It's a drawing of me. So it feels like I'm a little one step removed. And so that has given me this kind of extra way of talking about stuff that I think I probably wouldn't talk about publicly otherwise. And yeah, it's helped me connect with people. Yeah.
And because it's not one distinct face, people can see themselves in the illustrations, which is really so unique. I mean, as you know, like we're in a creator economy now where everyone shows their face. And so by not showing your face and by leveraging this art, it actually allows you to differentiate even further and to like take conversations maybe further because it doesn't feel as personal if you even get any negative criticism as well.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely it. Yes. I feel safer sharing this stuff from the point of view of a drawing without my face on it. And I think also something about it makes people share with me. I get so many DMs of people telling me these really, really personal intense stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I become almost like I get people a lot who message me and just say, I don't have anyone in my life I can tell this to. You don't even have to read this. I just need to dump it somewhere. It's like almost like my DM inbox has become just like this little therapy drop box. But, I'm happy to be that because I just know how isolated and alone so many moms feel, especially in those early years. And so it is really beautiful to me that that obviously there's so many problems with social media and I have a lot of issues myself with it, but there's so many places like that now on the internet, and not just my account. There's hundreds of them, thousands of them, but places where women can go to gather and say, you're not alone. I feel the exact same way. It's not you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the internet, I also struggle with the balance of social media specifically, not just the internet, but social media, Instagram, these algorithms. We know what it does to your brain. We know how addicting they can be. And we know that it has positively affected a lot of taboo topics and things that people felt very silently and brought that into mainstream conversation, which I think is incredible.
Yeah.
10 years ago, were we talking about miscarriage and IVF and the mental load? No. Now it feels like everyone's talking about it, like to the point where you're like, do we need to talk about this anymore? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like we've swum so far. And by the way, people should still share those things if that feels right to you. I'm not here to say you shouldn't, but I tend to agree with you. And I could easily see how you've created this like really safe space for people to open up to you because it feels like there's no judgment, which is incredible.
The thing I was saying then, which I think a lot of people are saying now, and I'm so glad, but was like, that I was really angry after that first year or two of my, I was angry at my husband. I was angry at just like this kind of motherhood industrial complex, for lack of a better word. Like, I loved my children so much. That's never been a question. It's not about how much we love our children. I was really angry that I felt so alone. I felt like this was so hard. I felt like why did no one tell me? Why do I feel like I'm failing all the time? Why do I feel like I'm dropping all the balls? And again, I think we're all saying that now, but I think saying that even just 5 years ago and talking about the rage and the anxiety and how miserable we could feel even in this moment of intense love and happiness. It was like that felt like to me something, it felt really good to be able to talk about that because I didn't feel like I could talk about that before. I mean, sure, I could with my closest friends, but it didn't feel like it was a conversation that we were all having saying, oh yeah, we all feel that way. That's totally normal.
I think that, people often say like you can hold space for two things.
Yeah.
motherhood isn't holding space for two things. It's holding space for like 100 things at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's that duality that actually drives the exhaustion from my perspective. It's like, how can I be so angry, so frustrated, so tired with everything and everyone, yet love everything and everyone so much and be so grateful? Like, that's a lot to carry.
That's
sure
a lot
to process day to day. Yeah. And one thing I really appreciate about what you said earlier that I want to call out is that there's not an end to that. Like, it changes. And I would imagine you would say that like certain things have gotten significantly easier, significantly lighter, while also being introduced to new things that can still trigger some of these feelings and emotions and exhaustion that you felt in the early days. And so I think that part actually hasn't been talked about a lot, which is that I think we all race to this like invisible finish line of motherhood. Oh, once I get to this point, once my kids are this age, and in my experience at least, or maybe that does not exist.
Right.
So once you remove that like finish line milestone mentality, like you will take the pressure off of yourself just a little bit.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that milestone mentality stuff is from, all the apps we have now and you get the emails that come at the certain week that tell you the things. And I do think we've kind of like commodified parenthood and motherhood and children in this kind of like data-driven economy we're in, where it's like, this happens, this happens, this. And I think it makes it programs our brains to think about motherhood very differently. And like you're saying, it does make us think, well, when we get to here, this should be happening. When we get to here, we should be able to move past this. And I think I definitely fell prey to that, because I think that's where a lot of my, I had so much anxiety about the milestones, and like my daughter she was really early talker, but a very slow walker. And the amount of time I spent obsessing about that, and obviously then you have a second kid and you understand. But, I just feel like because of the way we get so much data on parenting, it's made it that much harder for people who are kind of driven by that kind of information.
My dad always says that to me. He said, I'm so happy I was a parent when I was and not when I have two sisters, when you girls were, because it's so much harder to manage your stress and your anxiety and your fears because there's so much information being thrown at you, so many milestones. And then, of course, this is the negative part of social media. And then all the people shoving the best parts of their children and their family and their lifestyles in your face constantly, where you can't actually see what's real and what's projected. Yeah. So that is so real. I am curious on the book. So as you were developing this Instagram handle and really transitioning from blog to more kind of like these social media algorithms, did you know you wanted to write a book? Was it in the back of your mind? Had you always wanted to write a book? Like, I am curious to learn more about that journey as well.
Well, I should say that. So I started Mom Life Comics in July 2021. I have it written down because I always forget the years. And then in January 2022.
I understand.
Especially during the pandemic times, I'm like, what happened?
Yes.
But in January 2022, so less than a year later, or like 6 or 7 months later, I had a comic go viral. And that really changed things for me. It was a comic called An Illustrated Guide to the Double Standards of Parenting. And it was all these comics that were side by side, just talking about the way moms and dads are held to different standards, right? So it would show, for anyone who hasn't seen it, on one side, it would show a mom doing something, and on the other side, it would show a dad doing the exact same thing. And so an example is like the very first one I made was me coming into the front door holding a bag of fast food, and my husband coming in holding a bag of fast food. And above me, it says lazy mom, and above him, it says fun dad, right? So it was not about me and my husband. It was about societal expectations, right? So a dad's taking care of his kids, it's babysitting, mom's taking care of her kid. It's just mothering or parenting. So it was a really simple kind of illustrated side-to-side comparison of moms and dads. And that went viral. And that, before that, I had like 15,000 followers, which I thought was amazing. And within like 2 weeks, I had 100,000. And then it was like, within 6 months, it was 200,000. And around that time, after that went viral, because it went viral in a couple countries. So it was kind of like it kept kind of coming in waves. That was when I started having agents reach out and say, have you thought about writing a book? And no, of course I hadn't. It was like never in my wildest dreams.
Mary Catherine. I come across a lot of women that have this dream, especially someone, I would actually imagine someone like yourself who has this like more artistic liberal arts background would probably want to do that. So I'm actually surprised that wasn't in the back of your mind.
anything creative is like a dream. I think it was more just like I never expected it would happen to me. Yes, would I like to write a book?
Pursued
Absolutely.
in that way, where people are coming inbound versus like trying to get an idea and then finding a publisher to do that. How flattering! That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think I always tell people like I wasn't like an overnight success. Like I had been creating on the internet and creating art full time for 10 years. I had my own graphic design business, which was how I was paying the bills, and I was doing art on the side that whole time. Like I was very much like trying to figure out how to make a living creatively. And I was, but it was through like 15 different channels. I was doing lots of different things. Yeah. So anyways, when I started having agents approach me, I realized like, okay, this is something I could do. I got to like figure out. Cause I just had no idea how this whole world worked. So I did end up, talking to other female artists who I'd connected with by that point on Instagram and who had written books and saying like, what do I do? And they gave me great advice. And I ended up finding, a wonderful agent who walked me through the process. But I will say that when I found the agent and she was like, what do you want to write? It was like, I knew exactly. There was no question. It was like, I want to tell this story, which is basically, what I did, which is like, how do you go from being this super equal modern couple to, after kids looking up one day and going, how did we fall back into these much more traditional gender roles? And how do we get here and how do we get out? That's like still my biggest kind of focus is like, I just don't want that to keep happening to parents and especially moms, because I think it still happens so much despite, a lot of people who are younger will, one of the criticisms I get is like, oh, this is like boomer humor. Like this isn't how it is anymore. And I'm like, well, I beg to differ because you haven't had kids yet. Like it's easy to say that when you're 20 and hopefully it won't happen to you. Hopefully you and your partner will have a super equal experience with parenting. But, there are tons of people out there and there's a lot of statistics backing up that even after kids, no matter what, that despite what you were like before, after kids, moms are doing the majority of the housework, the care work, the parenting, no matter how much they did beforehand. So,
yeah. Well, Mary Catherine, this has been amazing. I know that our listeners would love to follow you, to learn more, to support all your incredible work. Where can people find you on the internet? How can people support you in your profession and all the things?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So it's, as you said, momlife_comics on Instagram. I'm also on Substack where I do comics that are separate from Instagram there. So that's another place to find me. But my website has everything. It's Mary Catherine Starr with 2 R's.com. And my book is called Mama Needs a Minute. And you can get it where books are sold. Definitely, the big ones, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and bookshop.org. But yeah. Thank you. This has been such a joy. Thank you for having me.
Oh, real quick before we wrap, any like new things on the horizon that like, do you have ambitions to write again? Like anything else that I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually working on a second book. It hasn't been like announced yet, but it's in the works and I'm really excited about that. And at this point I've really transitioned, before I started all these comics. Like I said, I was running a graphic design business and I've really been slowly kind of phasing that out, no matter how much I love that, because I'm almost doing this full time now. So it's really just, I'm creating these comics and I'm loving it. So Instagram is where I'm where a lot of my energy is still focused.
An accidental entrepreneur. I love it, Mary Catherine. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And I certainly know our followers and listeners will gain a lot of perspective and frankly, just humor and enjoyment in following you and hopefully reading your book as well. And look forward to future conversations as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for everything you're doing for moms.
Of course.